let's talk about your book a little bit, The Prepared Leader. I'm looking at behind you, and I'm looking at the subtitle, Emerge from Any Crisis. You sounds like you committed to memory, not surprisingly.
I hope so.
More resilient than before. So this is a book about leadership. There are other books about leadership, though, Erika. What's different about yours, and what do you have to say?
So this is really a continuation of the research that my co-author Lynn Wooten and I have been doing for a number of years, wanting to better understand how leaders can successfully navigate threats and challenges in their organization, so much so that the threat elevates to a crisis. And oftentimes when we think about crisis management and even crisis leadership, we're looking at the activities that happen once an event has happened, and how do you respond or react to it, which for me is an important and necessary component of leadership, but it's an inadequate, insufficient component. Because what leaders also need to do is understand how to anticipate, understand how to identify the vulnerabilities in their organization, and help them prepare for things relative to where they see vulnerabilities. And if we're not paying attention to the pre-crisis responsibilities, then we're not fully embracing all of the leadership goals. Similarly, I would say on the back end, if a crisis does happen, and let's say you navigate it successfully, how many times have we heard in this pandemic, oh, I'm glad that's over, so now we can get back to normal. Well, if that's the goal for leaders to get their organizations back to normal, then they're going to be behind the 8 ball when it comes to a whole host of other things. Because while other companies, pandemic notwithstanding, because everyone experienced crisis there, but for other crises, if leaders are focused on getting back to the way things were, their counterparts, their competitors who were not in a crisis have been continuing to run their trajectory, and we're now looking to go back. So leadership really is about paying attention to what is happening to prevent and mitigate crises, responding effectively if something does happen, and then how do you learn from in the back end so that you can actually realize those proverbial opportunities from the crisis.
I want to drill down into that first point, which is the preemptive part that you talked about. So it seems like that you're talking about anticipating black swans, which, you know, the pandemic was the giant one, right? I mean, no one anticipated, even though we probably should have. We've listened to Bill Gates, et cetera,
right,
et cetera.
That's exactly right.
But how do you sort of, by definition, I mean, it's the Donald Rumsfeld unknown unknowns, right? And how do you anticipate that or prepare an organization, say, for something like that?
So in the book, we talk about this cycle called panic and neglect. So what typically happens is some threat happens. We panic, we respond, it's over, and then we neglect it until the next one happens. And what we don't pay attention to is the fact that the next one is always going to happen. It may be a different kind of crisis or threat or challenge, but something else is always going to happen that takes us by surprise. So the preparation part is not letting those lessons from prior experiences, whether we experienced them personally or whether we've seen our competitors go through something, that could have just as easily been us. And going through a set of reflective exercises to ask ourselves, if that had been us, what would we have done differently? What can we learn? How should we establish our culture and our processes and our systems and our operations in a manner to avoid that experience going forward? But oftentimes we don't take the opportunity to learn either from our own prior experiences or from the experiences of others. But when we do, that can then inform and help us prevent future crisis.
It sounds like you're leaning on your training as an organizational psychologist a little bit here, right?
Of course.
And I want to ask you about the second part, which is the learning from the experience, from the crisis. It sort of sounds a little bit like what Ari Emanuel said, don't let a good crisis go to waste. Is it kind of like that?
It is exactly like that. And so if we don't take the time to say, what did we do well in managing this? What didn't we do well in managing this? And even more importantly, what role did we play in creating this problem? Because if we don't answer those questions, then we'll assume that everything just happens to us and we have no agency and we have no ability to control or mitigate or prevent something external from happening. So I think it's important to be really self-reflective, self being the organization, on the ways in which their own processes and procedures and structures and policies and norms are actually potentially contributing to, if not the crisis, their inability to respond to that crisis effectively.